It is my joy to have Charles Murray on the program and to discuss with him his new book titled Taking Religion Seriously. Charles Murray, welcome.
I'm delighted to be here.
I have to always ask the softball question. I'm an author myself of many books, and the question is, why did you write this book? Before I allow you to answer that question, let me ask you a previous question. Have you been a person of faith in most of your life? Is this something new? And I assume that's related to why you wrote the book.
Yes, the last half first, which is I was a standard intellectual agnostic from the time I went to college until my late 40s. And it was at that point that my wife, through a story that I won't go into right now, but she got engaged in Quakerism, not as socially active Quakerism, but spiritually engaged in Quakerism. And so that began a very long process indeed, where I tried to follow along because I could see she was having insights that I wanted to be able to participate in. And to the second part of your question, this was a long quarter-century evolution. And I was doing an interview with a colleague of mine named Nick Eberstadt a few years ago. And somehow during the interview, we got on to religion. And I was describing my rather eccentric Christianity that I now have. And at the end of it, he said, after the video had been turned off, he said, that ought to be your next book. And I suddenly realized that I have a story that applies to millions of other people like me, for whom religion has not been important. And I'm saying to them, actually, you can take it seriously and make it important.
I talk about this sort of thing all the time, so I'll do my best to keep my mouth shut because I take religion very seriously. But I will say this, before I had what I will call my conversion to Christianity, which is way back in 1988, I was under the misimpression under which I think much of our intellectual elites labor, that somehow you have to check your brain at the door, that faith is somehow separated, which is preposterous. It's a little bit like saying, well, I believe in gravity, but I can't see it, I can't prove it, but I just take it on faith. Clearly, that's ridiculous. But we seem to treat faith in that way, like it's this other thing. It has no relationship with material reality. Therefore, we will treat it in a way that seems to have no bearing on reality or logic, which of course is completely wrong. But so what was your journey on this?
Well, the way what you just described, my wife has a very nice way of putting it. You go to college and you learn that smart people don't believe that stuff anymore. And in her case, you see, as she was making progress on her spiritual journey, I don't like that phrase, spiritual journey, but that's what it was. I couldn't say that she was deluding herself. She's a very self-aware woman. I couldn't say that she's not very smart because she has a brilliant intellect. And so I had to take it. I had to say there's something here. And it was that which prompted me to realize something else, Eric, that I'm increasingly convinced of. And that is that spiritual perceptiveness is a human trait that is normally distributed the way that other kinds of human traits are, which means you can be at different places on that spectrum. My wife is pretty far over to the high end of it, and I'm pretty far over to the left low end of it. And I could not follow her. In this sense, Eric, she, for example, is engaged in the contemplative prayer aspects of Christianity. And in fact, she leads contemplative retreats. I find it really difficult to engage in contemplative prayer. So what I ended up doing was saying, look, I've got to deploy workarounds. And so I explored the ways that science, whether it's cosmology or the consciousness, bears on religious issues. I started looking into the historicity issues in Christianity. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but for me, that's the only game in town. And it's been rewarding. It's an inferior way. It's a more arid way than a religious conversion that you experienced. But you do what you can.
Well, but it is interesting because I think, you wouldn't know this, but I've written a book called Is Atheism Dead? Where I deal with first scientific evidence for faith, for God, I should say. And I mean dramatic scientific evidence, not sort of, well, maybe science says it's possible for there to be a God, but evidence that's, to my mind, astonishing evidence that most people, including most Christian believers, are unaware of. And in the second part, I deal with the historicity of the Bible as history via archaeology. I think most thinking people in America are utterly unaware of the astonishing evidence, both for the scientific evidence, for whether there's a creator, and for the archaeological evidence for the Bible as history. So even if you don't agree or don't come to the place where you say, well, I think it's true and I worship God, the God of the Bible, at least being aware of that, I think is very helpful to people. So I'm not surprised that that's a part of the path that you've taken.
Well, I actually did have a sort of road to Damascus moment, but it wasn't spiritual. It was empirical. And it was when I read this little slim book called Just Six Numbers by Martin Rees, who was the Astronomer Royal in Britain. And Just Six Numbers describes some of the parameters in the anthropic principle, which you're familiar with, of course. The anthropic principle that says the chances that the universe we live in would support life are literally 1 in trillions, And Francis Collins does a very good job of summarizing this in the language of God, where he says, look, you've got 3 alternatives. You can say there are multiple universes, which is what the physicists have tried to, I think, take up as a last resort, which I don't think passes the smile test. You could say, well, we're here, so there's no point in thinking about it. And I don't think that works if you're talking about a 1 in a trillion chance. Or you can say, that's very powerful evidence that the universe was created with intention. And among those intentions, which we cannot fully apprehend, is to permit life to exist. And I found myself saying, I can't believe I'm thinking this, but I don't see what alternative I have.
A lot of people have been asking lately, how can we bless Israel? Well, my friends at Artsa Box have found a beautiful, tangible way to do exactly that. Every Artsa Box is filled with handcrafted treasures from the land where Jesus walked. Like a hope necklace with the Star of David and the map of Israel, delicious Israeli spices and recipes, and a ceramic dish made by a group on the Gaza border that employs youth with disabilities and so much more. They're only selling this box for 6 more days, and it's almost sold out. And right now you can get 15% off with code Metaxas. So if you're a Christian who loves Israel, or someone who does, this is the perfect way to experience and share the beauty, faith, and hope of the Holy Land. Go to artsabox.com/Metaxas and get yours today. Well, the second option that you raise, not thinking about it, I think many people take that tack. They just don't think about it, because if you dare to think about it, you're going to be in trouble. If you dare to confront, I've said to people, honestly, if you dare to read just my book, there's so many books on this subject. I'm not familiar with the Rees book, but I've heard of it. I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. But if you dare just to read my book, I'm just curious what people would think. And if you're a hardcore atheist, I would guarantee, if you read it honestly, you cannot be an atheist. You can be an agnostic. You can have a million questions. I think it's healthy to have questions. But the idea that there's no God becomes preposterous, not just, maybe wrong, but absolutely preposterous. And when you're talking about, 6 numbers, the idea that life just exists and we'll take it for granted. Well, if you begin to look at it more closely, if you have the tools of science, which we didn't have 100 or 200 years ago, to really examine the fine tuning, then you can just shrug and think what you like. But suddenly now we have the fine tuning argument, and it's not one argument. I mean, the fine tuning argument applies to almost an infinity of things. So we're kind of in a new day. That's really what I keep talking about, is that science has given us the ability to see what we could not have seen in a previous century.
Another aspect of that is what we know about consciousness through developing bodies of data that are increasingly meeting all the scientific standards for what Carl Sagan used to say was necessary when he said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, I think in the bodies of evidence regarding near-death experiences and the body of evidence regarding what's called terminal lucidity, where people with advanced dementia in the hours before death have come back in terms of their personalities, their memories, their recognition for brief periods of time. You cannot absorb those and still be confident that consciousness can exist only in the brain. There seems to be too much out there which says, no, actually, consciousness can exist independently of the brain, which in turn opens up the possibility of the human soul.
It really is an extraordinary thing because, again, a strict materialist insists that the brain is all there is, that there's no mind. And as you just said, what do you do with the evidence? Thousands of people earnestly telling stories that work against that. What do you do with that? And I think there are plenty of people that they have to say, it's kind of like coming up with a multiverse theory. It's so silly, but they are more comfortable putting forward a really silly theory like the multiverse theory, or the idea that, oh, it was something you ate or was a hallucination. They don't seem willing to be able honestly to deal with it.
I look upon what's happened to science as William James did. When William James talked about scientism, scientism is the acquisition of a lot of characteristics of a religion by science. You know, the Enlightenment went a lot farther than saying that logic and empiricism are very powerful tools for understanding the universe. That was fine. But they said that's the only permissible way to explore the meaning of the universe, and everything else is ruled out. And so it's not that I have gotten a serious reaction to the parts of the book that deal with consciousness. So far, the reaction has been more of, how dare you suggest that this evidence needs to be taken seriously because we all know that that's supernatural hocus pocus and there can't possibly be anything to it. And in effect, there are hypotheses and signs and evidence that scientists who are otherwise very reasonable people, it's like they plug their ears and say, I can't hear you, I can't hear you.
Ironically, they become emotional and illogical.
Yes, very, very emotional.
It's ironic is it's a polite word. Hypocritical, I think, would be more to the point. And they don't care that they're being hypocrites, that they're denying the very things that they continue to claim. It's so interesting. You mentioned scientism. Scientism is at odds with actual science, which says we will follow the evidence wherever it leads. We know that in the Big Bang, the evidence leads to a singularity, to a moment where literally out of nothing, all of the space and time in the universe is created. That's what science tells us. And I think it's one of those things that for many decades, it made many scientists cringe and writhe. We cannot. This makes us uncomfortable. It actually made Einstein uncomfortable. I don't know if you know the story, but his equations were revealing, around 1915, the universe is expanding. And he thought, oh no, that won't do. I have to create this cosmological constant because it's embarrassing. It looks like there was a beginning It's pointing too much toward religion. And even the great Einstein was insecure among the other scientists who had bought into this scientific idea that we can't even look in that direction of a singularity. So in some ways, the whole thing is kind of funny.
Jastrow, I think it's Robert Jastrow, who was an astrophysicist, had a wonderful line in his book about the whole story of the Big Bang. He said, "It ends like a bad dream for a scientist. We clamber up the mountain trying to reach the summit of total knowledge, and we pull ourselves over the last rock, and the band of theologians has been sitting there for centuries." And that is, look, the Big Bang is a gloss on Genesis. It's Genesis recast as science. Let there be light, and there was light.
Right. And it really makes me think we're living in very, very exciting times. That the idea that we are talking about these things, more people are talking about these things. Because I do think there are many people who would sort of like to believe, but they simply don't think that there's any intellectual reason to believe, and people like you are telling them otherwise. What is in your book? Because the title, of course, is Taking Religion Seriously, but what are the specific things that you deal with in the book?
Well, the first half of the book deals with the question of taking God seriously, and it covers a lot of the material we've been talking about. And then the second half of the book is taking religion seriously, and specifically Christianity. Taking Christianity seriously. And Eric, I am one of the multitude of people who read C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and said to myself, oh, this is a brilliant man. I love the way he writes. I love the way he thinks. And he constantly is putting forth things into my head that I had not considered before that I cannot ignore and I have to deal with. And so I had points of disagreement as I read Mere Christianity, but in all of these cases, C.S. Lewis does not give you the option of saying, well, he has his opinion and I have mine. He has raised enough things that you say to yourself, I have to look into that before I know whether I can disagree with him or not. So he's got me started on that. And for those who think that you cannot take 2,000-year-old texts and treat them seriously, I've got to tell you, intellectually, it's utterly fascinating to go back and retrace a lot of the historicity of the Bible, as you alluded to earlier.
Oh, no, it's extraordinary. I think, again, many of us are laboring under this, I don't know, I guess it's sort of the hangover from the Enlightenment, that there was some age, this dark age, where people believed anything. And you think that's utterly untrue. 2,000 years ago, there wasn't anyone who believed that people could rise from the dead. Everyone knew that when you died, you were dead, unless you were in some kind of a coma or something. People understood the concept that death is death, which is the very reason that when Jesus rose from the dead, when Lazarus rose from the dead, people were just gobsmacked, unable to process what happened. But I think a lot of people kind of think like, well, no, it's sort of this cartoon era where crazy stuff happened, and they don't take it seriously. And when you actually read the Gospels, when you actually read and study, when you read C.S. Lewis, you really get uncomfortable because you realize I had it all wrong. People back then, their ability to determine, whether someone rose from the dead. These were not cavemen. This is not Neolithic people. These were rather sophisticated people. If you read the Gospel of Luke, unbelievable history. One of the greatest ancient historians, Luke. And I think most people simply are unaware of this. So I think that as people become aware of it, and thanks to books like yours, something really is happening. I think we're on the verge of an era of faith, actually.
Well, one of the things I think that has contributed to the dismissiveness of a lot of intellectuals of the New Testament are the revisionists. And I was aware of them during my years of agnosticism. And it was my understanding that you had these modern scholars of the New Testament who were going back and treating it as they would treat any historic text and analyzing it. And they had determined that basically the New Testament bears very little relationship to anything that Jesus ever actually said or did, that it was subject to endless creative additions and redactions and so forth over a long period of time. The Jesus Seminar that effectively poo-pooed all this. I bought into that. I thought, well, that's the sort of state of the art of New Testament scholarship. And C.S. Lewis raised my interest, but then it was about a year later that I ran across a book called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses by Richard Bauckham, the English theologian, which said the New Testament is explicitly constructed to emphasize the eyewitness character of the evidence. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And I loved the book, but then I found that there was a lot of other literature out there, some of which you've contributed to, which has looked at the scholarship and has found all sorts of reasons for saying the revisionists are not only wrong, they're almost 180 degrees wrong, that there's a great deal of reason to believe that what we have is historically accurate transmission of Jesus' teachings, and that the events in the New Testament are largely accurate. I was unaware of that because of the fog that had been laid over the scene by the revisionists, and I hope this pushback is reaching a critical mass.
Church has been tremendously guilty in opening the door to this kind of sloppy thinking. And, it starts, where does it start? You can go back and back and back. I mean, in the 20s, of course, we had this big battle between the so-called fundamentalists and the progressives, or whatever they call themselves. And, but it goes back into the 19th century. You always had people kind of grasping at straws if they could find something and pull at it. And this goes all the way through the 20th century. But it does seem to me that something is happening. I mean, I said that a moment ago. Your book, a number of other books, my friend Dr. Stephen Meyer, who wrote a book called The God Hypothesis, John Lennox.
Very good book.
Yes, John Lennox, whom I've interviewed many times at Socrates in the City. So many of the finest minds of our time who take religion extremely seriously, which of course is, your book is Taking Religion Seriously. I think atheism is on the ropes. And I say that, often people will say to me, oh, your book is atheism dead? Of course not, because I know some atheists. And it's like, well, I know some flat earthers. Just because there are people who refuse to look at the evidence, who cling to a theory such as the idea that the earth is flat, doesn't mean that we need to take it seriously anymore. We pretty much figured it out. The earth is not flat. And I really feel that that's where we are with the idea that there is no God, or that religion cannot be taken seriously.
I agree with you about the intellectual's attitude toward religion. I am encouraged by there's a whole spate of public pronouncements by unlikely people about their conversions. Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Neil Ferguson, but also there's Ross Douthat, who's been a longtime devout Catholic, with his book Belief. There are lots of things out there suggesting the intellectual atmosphere surrounding religion is changing, but at the same time, the statistics on the numbers of people attending church continue to drop, and I find that, well, in terms of the mainstream denominations, I think it's really simple. Mainstream Protestantism by Presbyterians and Methodists and so forth. So many of those churches are not religious anymore. They're just social activist teachings. And that's not going to gain you a lot of adherence. But I'm posing a question, not offering an answer. The question is, how is this going to play out? I would like to think that as the intellectual atmosphere surrounding religion improves, that more and more churches will feel comfortable returning to their roots and teaching real stuff, the real stuff, not this religion light, and that will bring back people to the churches. But I don't know that that's going to be the case.
I feel pretty sure that that's not going to happen. That the mainline denominations are utterly hidebound in their progressive thinking, and that progressive thinking embraces what I would call liberal theology, the idea that we don't want to take the miracles too seriously. We want to somehow separate out what Jesus did from whether he created, we agree with, and again, this is over 100 years old, but this idea that, well, we believe that it's important to feed the hungry, to take care of the poor. Let's do that stuff. But whether Jesus rose from the dead, we all know that can't happen. Or was Jesus born of a virgin? We know that can't happen. And I really think that it's, to use an Old Testament word, a shibboleth. You really separate the sheep from the goats, to use a New Testament idea, where people in the mainline denominations, they just feel uncomfortable with that. I think that would mean, rubbing elbows with the MAGA crowd or some group that they feel uncomfortable hanging out with. But again, you and I have been talking about this. C.S. Lewis and so many other brilliant people have espoused these ideas. So I would say we're seeing a seismic shift generally. We don't know how it's going to play out or what kind of churches we'll see it in. But it is, I just don't think there's any doubt that more people are reading the Bible. Something is happening. Want to give you a final word, Charles Murray. Just so glad for your new book, Taking Religion Seriously. What have we not touched on?
Well, just one thing to close with. I think we have a natural experiment going on in Europe where we have never seen an advanced civilization so secular as Europe has become. And I submit that story is not playing out well, and that probably over this century there will be a profound understanding of the importance of the ancient traditions that the Enlightenment left behind. I think that will be resurrected and we'll regain access to that, and that can make a huge difference to what is culturally acceptable.
Well, I certainly hope that's the case, and it seems to me the only way forward. I'm convinced, I'm writing a book on the revolution, I'm convinced that America could never have come into being without very serious Christian faith behind it in all kinds of ways. And that as we got that, basically, and we've been here 2.5 centuries, Europe really never clearly dealt with that. I think they kind of kept kicking the can down the road and are, of course, in this secular death spiral. So I hope they can pull out of it. But it does seem to me interesting that those two things are related. The health of a culture, the health of the West. There's just no way you can divorce that from Christian faith in one way or the other. Once again, just grateful for you, grateful for the book, Taking Religion Seriously. I look forward to speaking to you more about it at another time. Thank you so much, Charles Murray.
It's been my pleasure.
This Christmas, as we celebrate the Supercentennial coming up, Supercentennial 250th, there's no way, better way to support it than by supporting my friend, an American hero, Mike Lindell. He's one of the main sponsors on this program. He's the man behind My Pillow. He put his money where his mouth is. Some of you know this if you've watched the program. He stood up for the country. He was unfairly canceled by the big box stores. So I want us to stand with him. So please go to mypillow.com. Use the promo code ERIC to save big on pillows, sheets, slippers, everything you need for Christmas comfort. You'll sleep great, save big, celebrate freedom with My Pillow. Mypillow.com. Use the code ERIC.